Some bottles tell you everything on the label.
And some bottles tell you a story. The problem is, sometimes that story isn't exactly true.
Today, we're not just talking about bourbon, we're reading the fine print. Because what's on the outside of the bottle and what's in the bottle aren't always the same thing.
From multi-generational marketing myths to secret contract distilling, we're going behind the label to show you what you're actually paying for.
Stay tuned right here.
In the Lounge with Stave and Sly.
All right, so let's clear one thing up right up front. There is absolutely nothing wrong with sourced whiskey.
No.
Right? Some of the best and most respected brands on the shelf are sourced, or at least they started out that way.
Yeah, that's right. So that's not the issue at all. The issue is the transparency. Mm-hmm. The problem is when a brand's marketing implies a story, an old-timey distillery, a multi-generational family tradition, that liquid in the bottle doesn't actually back it up.
For sure. You see a bottle that looks craft, or it's geographically connected, but the whiskey was actually made in a massive Indiana distillery. If you don't know how to spot that, then you're not just buying bourbon, you're buying marketing. So the key words that you want to look for are distilled by. And if a brand is legally allowed to say that and they don't, there's usually a reason why.
That's right.
Yep.
So let's start with a brand that built an entire identity that was, for a long time, separate from its origin. We're talking about Whistle Pig.
Yep.
When people think of Whistle Pig, they think of like a farm in Vermont. But the reality is, the whiskey that built the brand was 10-year-old rye sourced from Alberta, Canada.
Yeah, you think about Whistle Pig and those red barns up there, right? You know,
right.
All the snow-covered barns. There's the snow, right? That's not how they started, of course, that sourced rye whiskey. Now, to be fair, that Canadian rye was fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's what put them on the map. And now they've since built their own distillery. It's a beautiful distillery, but that reputation was built on that sourced whiskey, right? And it's a classic case of image first, distillation later.
Yeah. And again, nothing wrong with source.
Not at all.
But I think we need to continue to foot stomp that it's not wrong. It's just we feel it's important that everybody understands what you're getting.
Yeah, we're just uncovering the labels.
So next, a brand where this conversation kind of got heated, and it ended up in court. We're talking about Templeton Rye. The story was incredible, a secret recipe from the Prohibition era with deep roots in Templeton, Iowa.
Yeah, but the only problem was the whiskey was actually being distilled at MGP,
right?
A massive contract distillery in Indiana, and was for a time artificially flavored to match that historic profile. And that backlash was huge, and it led to class action lawsuits and a complete overhaul of their labeling. Now they're much more transparent, but it didn't start out that way, and that's a cautionary tale.
Yeah, again, it's delicious, but you know what you're buying.
For sure.
Now, for one of the most successful and complex brand stories in modern bourbon history, Bulleit.
Bulleit. Yeah, you walk into any bar in the country and you see that iconic orange labeled apothecary style bottle, right? With the words Frontier Whiskey marked on the front. The official story is that in 1987, a lawyer named Tom Bulleit revived his great-great-grandfather's 1830s high rye whiskey recipe, Augustus Bulleit, right? It's a fantastic romantic tale of family, heritage, and living life on the frontier.
Yeah, but the story of the brand we know today is far more corporate and complicated than that. When Tom Bulleit first launched his brand, it was actually contract distilled at what was then the Ancient Age Distillery, the distillery we now know as Buffalo Trace.
That's right. And the bottles look completely different. They were in those square style bottles, those Elmer T. Lee, the ones that were made famous by Elmer T. Lee. But that brand really took off when it was acquired by the spirits giant Seagram in the 90s.
Yeah, Seagram was looking for a bourbon brand, and they loved the name Bulleit. They're the ones who created the now famous apothecary bottle, the askewed label, and the entire frontier whiskey marketing concept. They also moved the sourcing contract. When the initial barrels from Ancient Age ran out, Seagram's, who also owned Four Roses at the time, shifted production there.
Yep. And so for over a decade, I think it was close to 15 years, the backbone of Bulleit Bourbon was actually whiskey that was distilled at Four Roses. And I mean, if you're going to have somebody distill your whiskey for you, I think you can't ask for a better partner than Four Roses, right?
Can't complain about that.
But then it gets even more complicated. In 2000, Seagram dissolved and its assets were split up. And the Bulleit brand went to Diageo, one of the largest spirits companies in the world.
Yeah, and for years, Diageo continued to source Bulleit from Four Roses. It wasn't until around 2013, when both brands were exploding in popularity, that Four Roses could no longer keep up with the demand. Its fascinating web, a brand built on a frontier image, originally distilled at Buffalo Trace, acquired by Seagram's, made for years at Four Roses, and now owned by Diageo.
Yeah, that's a big web of
yeah, it kind of goes here, there, and everywhere, doesn't it?
Yeah. But that disconnect there, it wasn't just about where the whiskey was made. It was also about the family narrative. The entire marketing campaign was built around Tom Bulleit's heritage, right? That revived frontier recipe from his great-great-grandfather. But that hit a serious wall when his daughter, Hollis Bulleit, came forward with allegations of exclusion and being forced out of the family business.
Exactly. It created a massive controversy over the authenticity of the brand's story, eventually leading to Diageo quietly distancing itself from Tom Bulleit as the public face of the brand. It's a stark reminder that when you buy into a heritage brand, you're buying a carefully crafted narrative that doesn't always reflect reality.
For sure. Now today, Diageo has its own massive Bulleit distillery in Shelbyville, Kentucky. So most of what you're drinking now is their own distillate, but they still haven't entirely left sourcing behind, right? If you turn over a bottle of Bulleit rye and you look at that closely, you're going to see that incredibly popular rye, that in reality, it's 100% sourced from MGP in Indiana.
Yeah, but it's great rye.
It is.
But it's the perfect example of our theme today, right? The story on the front of the bottle is rarely the whole story. You always have to read the fine print.
Absolutely. Now, here's a brand that is a masterclass in storytelling, and one that we've called out before, and that's Jefferson's.
Yeah.
Yep. So they built their identity around the process rather than the origin. The Ocean Series is the most famous example, and that's where they put their barrels of their sourced whiskey on a ship, and then they let the sea do its magical aging.
Yeah, it's cinematic for sure, but underneath all that incredible marketing is sourced whiskey, mostly from Indiana. They lead with the journey, not the source. It's a brilliant strategy, but it's important for consumers to know what they're actually buying. Now, I will say, they are now producing their own distillate.
Yes.
But they are still sourcing, and you're getting a blend of both.
Yep. Sourcing and producing. And a lot of the brands that we're talking about, that source originally have, shifted to production, which shows you that, you can't just, for most folks, you don't just build a distillery and start making your bourbon right away and wait for it to age.
Yeah,
a lot of times you're sourcing, but it's being transparent and make sure that the consumer knows what they're buying, right?
Yeah.
So that sourced whiskey from Jefferson's, that's exactly what you're getting, right? But you're getting it with a steep upcharge, and because you're paying for that passport processing fee,
right.
I think most would think is maybe not worth it. Now, for a brand that's built on one of the most important and powerful stories in American whiskey, and one that we love this story, but it's also become a cautionary tale about rapid growth, and that's Uncle Nearest.
Yeah, the brand honors Nathan Nearest Green, the formerly enslaved master distiller who taught Jack Daniel how to make whiskey. It's an incredible, vital, and true story, but like many new brands, they had to rely on sourced Tennessee whiskey to get to market while their own distillery was being built.
Again, another one of those. And they're distilling now, of course, but consumers likely didn't realize in those early days of Uncle Nearest, that they were drinking sourced Tennessee whiskey and not that original juice that Uncle Nearest and Jack Daniel cooked up when young Jack was first learning how to make whiskey, right? And it's really that immense pressure to grow at a breakneck pace, I think, that led to some serious issues for Uncle Nearest. So in 2025, the brand unfortunately was forced into a court-appointed receivership after its primary lender alleged that the company had defaulted on over $100 million in loans. And now Uncle Nearest is in the process of being sold.
Yeah, it's a complex and messy situation with a federal judge recently finding the company insolvent, misrepresenting its holdings and valuation, and the founder, Fawn Weaver, not to be a credible witness. It's a perfect, if unfortunate, example for this episode. A powerful, authentic story on the front of the label, but a very complicated and troubled business in reality behind the label.
Yeah, Uncle Nearest is in the news for the wrong reasons recently, unfortunately. We featured Fawn Weaver. We love what they're doing at Uncle Nearest and reviving that story and all that, but it's again important to know the truth behind the label and kind of what's going on with that situation and know what you're buying again. So now let's talk about a classic example of geography in marketing, and that's Tin Cup. So everything about this brand screams Colorado Rocky Mountains, right? The name, the rugged tin cup on top of the bottle, the whole identity is built around being this whiskey from the American West.
Yeah, but if you read the fine print, the whiskey is distilled and aged in Indiana. It's MGP again. They add a small amount of Colorado water before bottling, which legally allows them to put Colorado on the label. It's a brilliant piece of marketing that connects the whiskey to a place where it wasn't actually made.
Yep.
Now, and I actually, looking at the table, realized we forgot to put the bottle of Tin Cup out, but I have.
Oh, okay.
I have a couple bottles over there, and it's good.
Yeah.
But know where it's coming from. Now, for a brand out west that is the textbook example of doing this the right way, we're going to talk about High West.
Yes.
From the very beginning, they built their reputation on being master blenders, and they were completely transparent about it.
Right. They sourced amazing rye from MGP, which we've talked about. There's nothing wrong with it. And from distilleries like Barton. And they told you right on the label where it came from. They created these legendary blends like Campfire and a Mid-Winter Night's Dram by celebrating the art of blending, not by pretending that they made it all themselves. And they built that trust first, and then they built a world-class distillery.
Yeah. I love what High West is doing. That Campfire, the smokiness in the Campfire is so good.
It's delicious. It makes a great old-fashioned. If you haven't made a Campfire old-fashioned, you should try it.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about Redemption Rye, because this is another brand that gets sourcing right. They aren't trying to trick you with a folksy story. Their identity is sourcing.
Yep. Their flagship rye is the classic 95% rye mash bill, again from MGP in Indiana. They're celebrating that iconic, spicy, bold MGP profile, right? They are, in essence, a curator of great Indiana rye, and they present it honestly.
Yeah. And it's, it's just good.
Yeah.
It's not, they're not trying to be something that they're not.
They're not, and they're not pretentious with it, like some other ones that we'll talk about where they're sourcing from MGP and then they're doing some finishing and they're doing some blending and things like that, and then they're jacking the price up.
Yep. Now, here's a name you see everywhere. Bardstown Bourbon Company.
Yep.
They have flipped the entire model on its head.
They're what we call a super sourcer, right? Yep. But with total transparency. Bardstown, I think, is the king of transparency. They built a massive state-of-the-art distillery, and then they opened their doors to other brands. You walk into Bardstown Distillery, and you see just a plethora of bourbon with names from all over the place. They distill for dozens of other labels, and they produce their own products, and they often blend their own whiskey and whiskey that they source from other major distilleries as well.
Yeah, so reading the back of a Bardstown Bourbon Company bottle is like reading a schematic. They tell you the mash bill, the ages, the origin states of every whiskey in the blend. They prove that you can be a blender and a sourcer without hiding anything.
For sure. Now here's a brand that has built a cult following by once again being radically transparent about sourcing, and that's Smoke Wagon. The team at Nevada H&C Distilling in Las Vegas are master at blending MGP whiskey. They don't hide that they source from Indiana, they celebrate it.
Yeah, but this is also where they draw criticism. While everyone respects their blending skill, their prices are on the higher side. The debate becomes about value. Are you paying for the whiskey itself or for the brand's expert palate and hype?
For sure, that's one that I was kind of talking about, where those prices just are really just on the higher end.
Yeah.
And you ask those questions for sure. Finally, let's talk about one more, Blade and Bow. This leans heavily on one of the most hallowed names in bourbon, the Stitzel-Weller Distillery. Now, the story is that they use the Solera system, which is blending a tiny amount of very old, rare Stitzel-Weller bourbon with a much younger whiskey.
Yeah, but it's important to understand that you are tasting a fractional hint of history, not a bottle of it. The Stitzel-Weller connection is a huge part of the marketing, but the liquid itself is almost entirely a modern product.
For sure. So what's the big takeaway here? It all comes down to a few key patterns. You have heritage without continuity, you have an old name revived with new liquid, you have craft without distilling, a brand that starts with source whiskey, and you have process over origin.
Yep. As a consumer, the key is to appreciate the difference between a distiller, a blender, and a marketer. All three can create a great product, but only if they're honest about who they are.
100%. Next up on Stay in the Slide, we are going into a deeper dive on the distilleries that do make their own whiskey. We're going to explore their signature mash bills, their unique production methods, and what makes their flavor profiles so iconic.
Now, before we go, just a reminder from both of us. Good whiskey is about the experience, not the volume.
So take your time, respect the proof, and sip responsibly. Cheers
From Stay in the Slide.